Next, from Washington, D.C., we talked to Grover Norquist, president of Americans Tax Reform, about his pledge that many politicians took vowing not to raise taxes, and whether we will ever see entitlement reform for such programs as Social Security.
Grover Norquist, president for the Americans for Tax Reform. Thanks for joining us on the Illinois channel. It's been a while.
It has.
As we are going, I'm going to remind viewers, first of all, you are the man behind the pledge that any number of candidates, could be Democratic, could be Republican, mostly Republicans, that you asked them to take a pledge not to raise taxes.
Correct.
Where are you on that effort, and relative to candidates running for, let's say, Congress and governorships in 2016?
We ask all candidates for governor, state legislature, Congress, Senate, president. And today, a majority of the members of the U.S. House of Representatives have taken the pledge. About 95% of Republicans running for office nationally take the pledge. We have about 49 senators have taken the pledge. And all the presidential candidates have made the commitment never to raise taxes, with the exception of Jeb Bush. All the others made that commitment. Among state legislators, over 1,000 state legislators have signed the pledge, and I don't know, more than a dozen governors.
When we look at, let's say, the federal government, now the Illinois channel, I'll remind people that, in Illinois, let me take that, the pensions were 5% of our budget in 2002, now they're 25%. The growth of entitlement spending at the federal government is analogous. It's eating up something like 60% or so. So the argument might be we have to raise taxes, either in Illinois or at the federal level, because we have painted ourselves financially into a corner by these programs that are growing on automatic pilot. What would you say to that?
It's the old Lone Ranger joke. What do you mean we, Kimosabe? We did this? Really? We did this? I don't remember being in the room when we did this. There were stupid and corrupt and short-sighted politicians who made promises that they could never, ever keep. Politicians in Detroit promised too many government workers, too much in Detroit, and then at the end of the day they had to come back and say, oops, we forgot to go steal the money, so you're out of luck. And we've already raised taxes so much and spent it on other stuff. We can't raise them more. People can leave Detroit. The national challenge we have on entitlements is a big challenge, but very few people leave the United States. It's very easy to decide, I will not stay in Illinois in order to pay the ridiculous promises on pensions that the politicians in Springfield and Chicago made over my objections, and not for my benefit. I think I'll move to Florida, where they didn't do that. I think I'll move to Texas, where they didn't do that, and I won't be asked to pay for other people's mistakes. Mistakes is the kind word. I mean, I think it's hard to actually credit elected officials with the idea that they didn't know that these pensions were going to explode. And it's the same trick that politicians employed with the Great Society and the New Deal and the entitlement issue that they created, which was, we'll promise you a little bit today, but over the years it's going to get worse and worse and worse. But you know what? I'll be dead by the time your children realize they were screwed.
And I will tell you, I don't disagree with you. My master's thesis back 20 years ago was on the coming collapse of publicly funded pensions. You could just do the math. They promised more than they were funding, and you couldn't carry that indefinitely.
Yeah.
But let's say at the federal level, can politicians say we're going to go and change the deal on Social Security? And Mike Huckabee, who bills himself as a conservative, said, no, we shouldn't change that. That was a promise made to these people. Where are the parties? And you knowing them more than I, is it realistic to say in the next 4 years, whoever's president, we're going to get some entitlement reform? Because I also covered the Kerry Danforth Commission on Entitlement Reforms back in '95, and nothing came of that.
No, if you had a united Republican House, Senate, and presidency, you'd see reforms, because the Republicans in the House have 5 times voted for Paul Ryan's entitlement reform package, which block grants, means-tested welfare, out to the states, just like we did with aid to families with dependent children. and all the left-wing complaints that this will end the world didn't happen when we moved aid to families with dependent children to the states. So the Ryan roadmap to prosperity is in fact got the votes in the House and Senate within reconciliation, so you can do it with 51 votes in the Senate. As soon as you have a Republican president, that happens. That solves most of the entitlement problems that we have. Not Social Security, because that takes 60 votes, but Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps. So add to that we don't have to wait, and we're not waiting for Washington. Utah passed a law 4 years ago that all new hires, state, local, police, firemen, teachers, everybody, gets a defined contribution pension. Here's your pay, here's 10% of your pay in a 401k, an IRA, a personal defined contribution pension. You can add another 10% yourself, and if you want to leave in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, or 40 years, it's up to you, but your pension is under your control. It's a corpus you own. Nobody's going to surprise you and tell you which we forgot to build it.
I don't want to get too deep in the woods, but something I often tell people who have a government pension, the bad part of that, you might have the government guarantee, but if you get hit by a Mack truck the day after you retire, that's the end of your pension.
Yes.
Does the plan you were just talking about, would that be part of someone's estate that
it would
could
go right
to
your
their
children, your wife or your children, yeah. You'd actually have assets.
We could talk for an hour and we don't have the time, but in the big picture, as we go into 2016, what do you think are the critical issues that you would tell the voters, pay particular attention to this, and what people say they're going to do about these particular issues?
Taxes, one, are they for a pro-growth economic policy? Two, are they willing to rein in the explosion of regulations, meaning not recommend more and in fact undo some of the expensive ones? And then third, on spending, are they willing to tackle entitlements? Are they willing to reform them? Not cut them tomorrow, but reform them so that they cost less over the next 30 years.
And when we talk about Social Security, we're not talking about anyone probably 55 or above. We're talking about
Correct.
people maybe more like the age of 35 or below.
Yeah, then you'd see some reforms there. People are living longer. Social Security has recognized that, so they start Social Security a little bit later. But over time, as those numbers and those days get older and older, people will be working a little bit longer.
And just as we go out, give us a little blurb about your organization and what are you trying to achieve and how you're trying to achieve it.
Americans for Tax Reform wants to make sure everybody's focused on the tax issue when they vote, that they understand that taxes should not go up at all. If you ever raise taxes, then it means the government won't reform spending. The only time they think about reforming spending is when taxes are off the table and they have to reform spending to make the budget work. As long as taxes are an option, they never get to reform.
Grover Norquist, thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.